Hi, it's Anna here. Welcome back to my channel, the best place for parents or educators who want to learn and evolve with their children. Today I will be discussing Your 6-Year-Old, Loving and Defiant by Louise Bates Ames. Just like these books that I have already summarized, this book is part of a whole book series that were written as part of a large study observing children from birth to 16 years old over 100 years. So it is a very thorough study. And even though these books were written in the 70s and 80s, and as you can imagine, some of the references are outdated, like women not working, for example, children haven't changed. And I haven't encountered books on child development that are as thorough as these ones. So I highly recommend them to anyone. The main point of these books is that during their study, they discovered that child behavior does develop in a highly patterned way. Just like you are probably familiar with periods of regressions in babies, young children also continue to have clear and predictable stages of equilibrium and disequilibrium, which basically means periods of regulation and periods of dysregulation, which really explains why parenting can be such a roller coaster sometimes. Of course, they still acknowledge that each child is unique with unique personalities. I mean, I'm a mom of 3 children myself, and I can tell you that none of them have gone through these stages in exactly the same way. This is just a representation of the average child of this age, a huge generalization. So you need to be taking this information with a grain of salt. Not all children will display the behaviors that I'm about to discuss today, and not all of them will go through the exact stages at the exact time it's supposed to happen. The ages are also only provided as a guide. Your 6-Year-Old was actually the very first book that I read from this series because at the time I was very concerned with my eldest's behavior. And the knowledge that I gained from this book really helped me not to take her behavior personally and also to hold on to the big developmental picture so that I remembered that it was just a phase and it wouldn't last forever. And it really helped me also to know that there was nothing wrong with my child and there was nothing wrong with what I was doing. First, we will discuss specific characteristics of the 6-year-old. Then we will discuss social development, general interests and abilities, and then I will end this video with specific advice for this age. So let's start with specific characteristics of the 6-year-old. Somewhere between 5.5 to 6-year-old, typically children enter a period of disequilibrium. And I really felt this with my eldest, and I keep seeing comments and posts of mothers of 6-year-old on social media, so I know I'm not the only one who went through this. After the somewhat calmer and more easygoing age of 5, the attitude and hot and cold behavior of my 6-year-old really took me by surprise. What is characteristic of this age is this split personality, which is so well represented in the book title, Loving and Defiant. Because it's exactly this. Your 6-year-old can be so sweet, affectionate and happy one minute, and then aggressive, defiant and combative the next instant. The author actually tells us that they are at their best and also at their worst with their primary caregiver. And the most important thing to understand is that they aren't doing this on purpose to annoy you. This external split that you are seeing is an expression of an internal split. They feel torn between wanting to be a baby a little longer and wanting to become more independent. At 5, their mom, or whoever the primary caregiver is, was the center of their universe. And at 6, things changed drastically. They are now the center of their own universe. And they feel so much anxiety and confusion about what's happening to them. They feel this intense love and warmth for their primary caregiver, but at the same time, they feel this urge to become more independent, so they feel the need to push them away and separate from them. And that's why it comes across as aggression most of the time. They depend on their primary caregiver so much, and yet part of them wishes that they didn't. Typically, the 6-year-old is expansive and out of bounds, dramatic and loud, demanding, contrary or combative, aggressive and stubborn. As mentioned before, they can also be very affectionate and loving, and they are extremely enthusiastic and adventurous. So it's not all bad. They are very curious, they love asking lots of questions. One characteristic of this age is that they are very competitive. They need to be first and best, so any failure is very hard on them. They cannot bear to lose or any kind of criticism, so it's probably best to avoid any win-lose board games for a while. And they also like to show off. But when they show off that something is easy for them to do, you can assume it's actually quite difficult. On the other hand, they love to be praised and complimented. And they are easily hurt emotionally, so they may start crying about almost anything, about not wanting to go to school, getting dressed, and so on. They tend to fling clothes all over the house and often lose shoes. And as is quite often the case during a period of disequilibrium, they can suddenly seem clumsy and uncoordinated and hurt themselves more often. And they will likely cry more often when hurt and cannot bear the sight of blood. Also, don't be surprised if, like is also typical of 5-year-olds, they go through your private things and may take things like money or objects. The best prevention is to lock things up. They also tend not to always tell the truth, which is good to remember as they report stories from school. And they are their best with the adult if full attention is being paid to them. It is mostly when they feel neglected or shut out that they act foolish and demanding in order to get attention. So it's a great idea to schedule one-on-one time with them whenever possible. For us, what worked really well during this difficult time was to spend 30 minutes of one-on-one time with my 6-year-old when her younger siblings were in bed at night. And the great news is that periods of dysregulation never last. When your child comes closer to 6.5-year-old, they typically enter a period of equilibrium again. So your relationship will improve dramatically. They are a little calmer and much more warm and loving than at 6. And they typically will be much more happy most of the time, fun and enthusiastic. Now let's move on to social development. Because of the typical oppositional and extreme ways, they are also at their best and at their worst with other people. So they can be an amazing friend and student where they are warm, friendly, fun and enthusiastic. And at other times, they can be aggressive, both physically and verbally, emotional. And because they are so competitive, because they want to win and be the best at everything, it does not make for easy relationships. And it's the same with siblings. They can be an amazing sibling, but they can also be bossy and argumentative, which tends to escalate sibling rivalry. And they tend to be quite jealous of the attention given to other siblings. And I really noticed that with my 6-year-old at the time. Whenever I would compliment her sister, she would really take it as an offense to her. Now let's move on to general interests and abilities. 6 is full of adventure and he likes to experiment, likes the new. Almost anything will catch and hold his interest. They love being creative, whether it's arts and crafts, drawing or construction. They are full of imagination, so we should provide lots of material. But at the same time, being creative shouldn't be restricted to drawing. It can also be storytelling. In fact, they love hearing stories about your own childhood, especially the times when you were naughty. There is also this great technique from this video where you give to your child in fantasy what they can't have in reality, which is a great technique for this age, especially as they also love jokes and guessing games. They love books, and because of the wide difference between reading ability at this age, some may prefer to read by themselves, whilst some others may prefer to be read to. In terms of motor behavior, they tend to overextend themselves. For example, they may swing too high. And they tend to be quite restless, almost constantly active when sitting. They wriggle, sit on the edge, and may even fall off. You can see this in action usually at dinner time, where eating will take forever. I remember my 6-year-old started taking 1 hour to eat her meal, which used to drive me crazy. But also when drawing, they may stand and lean way over the table and continue to draw, or may even rest their head on their arm in constant moving while doing something. They are easily distracted by things in their environment, which is good to know when doing their homework. Probably best to do it in a quiet room with no other distractions like TV or siblings. And with sleeping, they usually sleep well once asleep, but may find it hard to fall asleep and they usually want to delay bedtime. One trick that I still use to this day is that bedtime is a perfect time to have a discussion with them, as they tend to be much more open, so it's an open door to what's going on for them, especially at school. So I usually add a 15-minute buffer to bedtime routine to have that chat. And also, because it is such a difficult age, bedtime is also a great way to reconnect with them after what may have been a particularly difficult day. And that's very effective because they love to talk, love conversations, and love to share their thoughts. And because they are highly emotional, they might need more soothing habits than usual, like nail biting, grinding teeth, chewing hair or pencils, sharp verbal comments like "I hate you," or full-on temper tantrums. All these are expressions of their intense emotions and their way of releasing them. And even though they have a bigger understanding of time, it is still not usually effective to tell them they can play for 20 minutes. It's still too abstract for them. So you will need to either use a reminder or a timer to help track the time. Now, I always love to end these videos with specific advice for this age. I've got 5 pieces of advice for you that are based a little bit from this book, but mostly from my own experience. And if you need more help with this, I highly recommend you watch this video, where I go through my 5 favorite steps for effective discipline. So here are my 5 things that I recommend you do to survive this age. The first thing, probably the most important one, is to pick your battles. There will be a lot of conflict, so it's probably best not to pay attention to all the things that you don't like your child doing. The second very important advice is to not take their behavior personally. Like I've said before, their behavior has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own internal discomfort. And adding fuel to the fire only makes things worse. The third piece of advice is to try to catch them doing something good, really notice it and tell them about it. For example, you could tell them, "I really loved it when you helped your brother put their shoes on this morning. It was so sweet of you." They really love praise at this age and they get hurt very easily from criticism. The fourth piece of advice is that it's a great age to start collaboratively problem solving with them. And by that, I mean really having a lot of discussions when they have problems so they can try to come up with their own solutions. Because very often we make assumptions about their behavior that actually make things worse. Because really, we're not in their head. We don't really know what the problem is. So having these conversations can be so powerful because we get the insight from our child. And then it's so much more powerful when they themselves can come up with their own solutions. Firstly, because like I said, we aren't in their head and we don't really understand what the problem is. But also, because they will have come up with their own solution, they will be much more inclined to actually implement it. And if you need help with this, I highly recommend you watch this book. It's such a great book that goes into this exact scenario of having a collaborative problem-solving discussion with your child. And it gives you step-by-steps on how to do it without actually giving the answers to your child, which is so tricky to do when you haven't practiced it. And last but not least, get support. It's such a tricky age and a tricky phase, and you will need to recharge your batteries. That's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please leave me a like if you have, and please leave me a comment. I'd love to know about you and your 6-year-old. Thanks for watching and keep growing.